Okay, Rabbi Say, let's get started. Being buried in Eretz Yisroel. Is it a good thing? Obviously, right? Is that for sure true? Does everybody agree?
Everyone's doing it.
Everyone's doing it. Is it worth it? How much does it cost? Is it the best place to put your money? Let's find out. So we all heard of the idea about being buried in Eretz Yisroel. L'chayr, seemingly, everybody thinks it's a schus. L'chayr, it's a schus. Is there a makar? Do we have a makar for being buried in Eretz Yisroel? So the first place to start off, obviously, would be, first place to come to mind is we got to think about the obvious. We got to think about Yaakov Avinu. We know Yaakov Avinu asked his children not to be buried in Mitzrayim, and rather to be brought to Eretz Yisroel. Why was it? What were the reasons that Yaakov Avinu wanted to be buried in Eretz Yisrael and not in Mitzrayim? So Rashi brings down 3 reasons. One reason was Yaakov Avinu knew Baruch HaKodesh that there was going to be Makas Kinim in Mitzrayim, and he didn't want Makas Kinim being around. He didn't want Kinim. The dirt was going to turn into Kinim. He didn't want Kinim around him. Reason number 2 is he wanted to avoid the pain of Gilgal Mecholis, going through the tunnels by Tchias HaMesim. We'll discuss in a minute what exactly that means, but something about going through tunnels to Eretz Yisrael, rolling through tunnels, he didn't want that. Number 3 is he didn't want to be made into Avodah Zarah in Mitzrayim. He had a chashash that they would worship him, and he didn't want that, and therefore he wanted to be buried in Eretz Yisroel. Well, seemingly at least that's the reason he didn't want to be buried in Mitzrayim. Not so clear cut that he needed to be buried in Eretz Yisroel, and that reason. So let's actually go one by one and think about these reasons. So I always had a basic kasha. It's very pashut. We know the Makkahs, they affected Mitzrayim. They didn't affect the Yidden, right? Now, why in the world was Yaakov worried that the Kinim would be around his body, affect his body? The Kinim didn't affect the Yidden. And did it affect the Jewish Mason? I don't know. I would assume not. Certainly not a Yaakov Avinu. I would have assumed that it wouldn't affect him. So what was the whole chashash? So I saw I heard actually, quoted from a sefer, Oil Yeshua, original, one of the early Belzer Rebbes, that he says a Murray de Kapshat, and this is where we connect a little bit to last week's share about whether you need to be buried in the ground or not. So the problem is that the Kinim, the ground around him, would turn into Kinim. And if the ground around him would turn him into a Kinim, he wouldn't be buried in dirt anymore. He'd be buried in Kinim. And therefore, that's what he was concerned about. But not that it would actually affect him personally. Now, I find that answer just a little funny, just as a side point, because I think that's pretty affected by Kinim, if you're completely surrounded by Kinim, even if they're not biting your body. But okay, one might want to make a connection to last week and say, you see, there's a raya, you need dirt. Because there's some of the, as I said, the Kanaim are all screaming, you need dirt. Whereas I pointed out that I didn't really see any clear-cut makaris that you need dirt. So maybe you want to say that this is a makar that you need dirt, because Yaakov Avinu was worried he didn't want to be buried in lice, he wanted to be buried in dirt. L'chayr, I would say this is not a makar, because, Aral Shailas, does cement count? I can understand, it's possible that cement would be fine, but moving, living, alive lice isn't a proper kfura in something that's moving around. But that doesn't prove that cement's a problem. It proves that ground is better than lice, but it doesn't prove anything about our discussions of things like cement. Okay, there's another question, which is that why Chazal say that the lice only affected the first 3 tvachim of the ground? I mean, it's a lot. The first this much of the ground to be covered in lice is pretty nasty. But surely Yaakov Avinu, we would expect to finish to follow the minhag. In America, as they say, 6 feet under. In Eretz Yisroel, the minhag is 1.5 meters. 4.5 feet down is how far they dig. Way more. 3-4 times as deep as 3 Tvachim. The lice wouldn't have got them anyways. And if you want to say, okay, Yaakov Avinu didn't keep the minhagim. They didn't get buried 1.5 meters deep. But surely he kept the halacha. We know it's brought down in the Shulchan Aruch, as I quoted last week. You have to be buried with 6 feet of dirt. And even the Goyis Rabbi Kiva Eger, quoting the Sefer Chassidim, says you have to have at least 3 Tvachim of dirt. So if the lice were only affecting the first 3 Tvachim, he would be lower. So what would be the problem? So I saw suggested that from the Maskil David, not the Maskil David, who is it? The Meim Lois, The Meim Lois answers that, but Yaakov would have been buried in a cave, in the wall of a cave. And if he would have been buried in the wall of a cave, he would have been above the ground, not under the ground, in that cave. And Mamela, the lice could have got to him. So, which is another thing interesting that plays back, which shows the history of being buried in the wall of a cave. The Kuchen, yes. Alright, that's that. Now, the tunnels. So this seems to be this is the one reason, we're just going to reason number 2, that really is a reason to be buried in Eretz Yisroel. The other reason 1 and 3 were just reasons not to be buried in Mitzrayim. This is a reason to be buried in Eretz Yisroel, because if you are buried in Chutz La'aretz, you have the Tsar Gilgal Mechilos, the pain of rolling through these tunnels. What exactly does that mean? I don't really know. It doesn't. I can tell you it doesn't sound fun. That much we know. We know it doesn't sound fun. What it really means, it's hard to say what it really means, but it doesn't sound fun. I know the Maskil of David says the big tzaddikim have big tunnels that they could just walk through. So I'm guessing like most people are like, the army thing on your elbows, like going through. I don't know. Something that doesn't sound fun. But the people of Eretz Yisroel apparently don't have to go through this. There's a medrash that asks, why did the Avos love Eretz Yisroel and want to be buried here? And it says because the Mesim of Eretz Yisroel will get up first by Tchias HaMesim. They'll be the first ones to get up. And the Meim Loyes actually says that it's going to be 40 years before. Those buried in Eretz Yisroel will have Tchias HaMesim 40 years before those buried in Chutz La'aretz. I was wondering, I guess it doesn't really make sense because it depends on where you're buried in Chutz La'aretz, but I wonder if that's the 40 years. Does it take 40 years to go through those tunnels? Maybe, I don't know. But that pshat, it sounds interesting. It's my own thought, my own ha'ara, but it depends where people are, where exactly they're buried. And how does it work from like Australia? Do you do like a straight line? Do you go under? I don't know these things. I think does it get very hot or very cold down in the middle of the center of the earth? I don't remember from Earth sides. Very hot, right? So I don't know if that's going to work out so well. Okay. However, all this works. Okay. However, the Meim Loyes says something very interesting. He says that this won't work so well with the pshat that I just said, actually. But he says, if somebody in Chutz La'aretz supported their relative in Eretz Yisroel, allowing their relative to live in Eretz Yisroel, then that relative in Eretz Yisroel could drag the relative from Chutz La'aretz there with him at the earlier point, the 40 years earlier. But it sounds like it's not like an automatic thing. He could drag him along. However exactly that works, and only if he helped him live in Eretz Yisroel. Okay. And the interesting thing, Rabbeinu Ephraim brings down an interesting gematria. He says that Al Notik Raveni is gematria 854, which is the same gematria as Tsar Gilgal Mechilos. So I thought that was pretty cool. Now, we also have the third reason that Yaakov is concerned that he's going to be made into Avodah Zarah, and that L'chaira doesn't bring any raya to being buried in Eretz Yisroel. L'chaira, I don't think any of us are concerned that anybody's making us into Avodah Zarahs and Chutz La'aretz. Presumably not. Okay, so Yosef HaTzadik, he wanted to be buried in Eretz Yisroel. So he asked for his bones to be brought to Eretz Yisroel. We know right before leaving Mitzrayim, when everybody was busy gathering the riches of Mitzrayim, Moshe Rabbeinu was very busy gathering the Atzmas Yosef. Why everybody else went for the riches and not for the Atzmas Yosef, that's a different shmooze. But Moshe Rabbeinu, he went to get the Atzmas Yosef. A question that always bothered me was, why Atzmas Yosef? I grew up with all these, by Yaakov Avinu, it's bring his body. By Yosef, it's bring his bones. I grew up with all these stories of the miser of, Vilna or Kovna or wherever it was in Europe, who didn't give any tzedakah, and then 20 years later, they needed to dig up the cemetery because and everybody hated that guy, and then they needed to dig up the cemetery to build a road there, or the government, or whatever. They dig him up, and his body is complete. And they figure, what's going on? How could it be? The miser? And they figured out that he was supporting, hundreds of aniyim all over the place, B'Seser, etc. All those types of stories. They dug up the cemetery, and the guy was complete and full. And I'm sure that they were tremendous, great people. We're talking about big tzaddikim. But Yosef at Tzaddik, there's only a couple people who were ever called Tzaddik by the Torah. There's Binyamin at Tzaddik, there's Yosef at Tzaddik. 2-3 people that were ever called Tzaddik. Yosef at Tzaddik. How could it be that Yosef at Tzaddik, that miser of Vilna or Kovna or wherever it was, he gets his body full, but Yosef at Tzaddik becomes bones? So I always had this kasha. So I was thinking about it. I want to suggest a little teretz that maybe Yosef was concerned following his father Yaakov's chashash of becoming Avodah Zarah. He knew that it's going to be a couple hundred years before he's brought back to Eretz Yisroel. Maybe he was concerned that if his body wouldn't decompose, then they would treat him like Avodah Zarah. Who are we talking about? We're talking about the Mitzrayim. What were the Mitzrayim into? Mummies, mummifying. That was their shtick, preserving the body. So if they buried Yosef completely full, why they check on it, I don't know. How it got checked on, I don't know. Who knows what would happen. But if it ever gets checked up and they see that Yosef's body is still complete, so that's perfect reason to make him Avodah Zarah. They were into that type of stuff. So what did Yosef do? He commanded his descendants, bring my atzamos to Eretz Yisroel. Once he made it tzava that he should bring my bones, Hashem he kind of forced Hashem to give his relatives, his future generations, the opportunity of fulfilling his tzava. So he had to become atzamos. Once he commanded, bring my atzamos. So once he made that as a command, they needed for his relatives that the heketimsa to bring the bones, they had to be the mitzias. So he maybe Yosef kind of like, in a way, twisted HaKadosh Baruch Hu's arm, so to speak, kaviyachal, to make him decompose into atzamos, and then Mela getting out of the issue of being Avodah Zarah. That was a nice pshat, an interesting pshat. MS, I don't know. Definitely good for a Shabbos table. Okay, fine. Now, the Gemara in Ksubas says, whoever is buried in Eretz Yisroel as if he is buried under the Mizbeach. Now, what exactly does that mean to be buried under the Mizbeach? So simply, it seems the Mizbeach has a connotation of kapara. That's what there's association. Mizbeach is something that forms kapara. So simply speaking, that means that you get a special kapara being buried in Eretz Yisroel, and the Rebbeinu B'chaya says being buried in Eretz Yisroel gives you a special kapara. The Rambam says that yes, being buried in Eretz, you should be buried in Eretz Yisroel. Being buried in Eretz Yisroel gives you a special kapara. But the Rambam points out, don't think it's the same level being buried in Eretz Yisroel as dying in Eretz Yisroel. Dying in Eretz Yisroel gives you a much higher level kapara than stam to be buried in Eretz Yisroel, meaning where you have died elsewhere. It's actually a famous story that's brought down in Chuvas of the Rambam, where somebody wanted to be buried in Eretz Yisroel. They told their kid they wanted to be buried in Eretz Yisroel. The kid had no money. They died, this couple, and then the kid finally found somebody that was coming to Eretz Yisroel, and he said, you're going, when you go back and forth to America, Eretz Yisroel, people give you packages. So somebody said, do you mind taking this bag of bones? It's my mother and my father. And bring it to Eretz Yisroel. And the guy did it, buried them close to Yerushalayim. When he came back, he asked the Rambam, was this the right thing that I did? He said, it's amazing, it's a great thing that you did. So, because you could affect that you get an extra kapara when you're buried in Eretz Yisroel. So, guys, don't try this at home. Please don't send me back with packages of bones. Okay. But that is interesting. The Gesher Chaim points out as well, that's a modern day posik. That's Rav Chikatinsky again, returning. Our specialist in the Dateline, our specialist in Zmanim is also our specialist in Avelis. And our Avelis and Kfura. So, the Gesher Chaim says the same thing, that there is a special kapara of dying, of being buried in Eretz Yisroel, but it's not nearly as great as dying in Eretz Yisroel. So far, what we said so far seems to be no-brainer. It's great, it's amazing to be buried in Eretz Yisroel. However, there is a little bit of a shocking Yerushalmi. The Yerushalmi brings down a story of Rabbi Bar Kira and Rav Lezer. And they saw aronis, coffins of dead bodies coming from Chutz La'aretz. And when Rabbi Bar Kira, when he sees these coffins coming from Chutz La'aretz, he was disgusted. And he says, they lived their life in a Makom Tumah, and now they bring their Tamei bodies to be buried in Eretz Yisroel? And he was very disgusted by this practice. You live your life in a Makom Tumah, and now you bring your Tamei bodies to Mitama, the Tahara of Eretz Yisroel? Eretz Yisroel is not for dead bodies. Rav Lezer, in a seemingly a more calmed down approach, says, let's just put dirt on the mace and let the mace have kapara. It's unclear exactly whether Rav Lezer was arguing, or whether Rav Lezer was saying we just have to make the best of the situation. It's unclear whether he argued in Yesod or he argued in the approach to take to the current situation. He definitely was held. He wasn't into the screaming against the practice But he said, we'll put some dirt on and they'll get a kapara. It's unclear at which point he argues. Now, by the way, this is the makar for the idea of putting dirt on top of the mace and affecting a kapara. There's most of the Chevre Kaddish of Chutz La'aretz, they use dirt from Eretz Yisroel, and they put it on the mace in different parts, on the forehead, on the chest, on the eyes, on the Makom Milah. Each they all their own minhagim, which I'm not going to start to understand. But a lot of them have dirt from Eretz Yisroel for this purpose. There are some, the Gesher Chaim for one, and I totally hear his point. He says, I don't understand what this helps. You bring dirt from Eretz Yisroel to Chutz La'aretz. You know what dirt in Eretz Yisroel, from Eretz Yisroel and Chutz La'aretz is called? It's called dirt of Chutz La'aretz. You take that dirt from Eretz Yisroel, right, and you put it in a flower pot, and you plant it. Are you chayiv in Shumas HaMeisos? No. Could you work in a Shemitah? Yes. You know why? It's dirt of Chutz La'aretz. And you bring dirt from Chutz La'aretz, you bring it to Eretz Yisroel, you put it in a flower pot. Are you chayiv in Shumas HaMeisos? Yes. Chayiv in Shemitah? Yes. So therefore, there's no such thing as having dirt from Eretz Yisroel in Chutz La'aretz. What do they say? I don't know, they say it does work. Listen, I'm not one to have an opinion when it comes to this, spooky stuff. So when it comes to the spooky stuff, and what you do with Mason and all that, I don't have any major opinions. So I guess they can do what they want. Okay. Fine. So that was the Rabbi Bar Kira very against it, and Rav Lezer unclear whether he's have a positive attitude or actually saying it's okay. There is a Zohar HaKodesh. This Zohar HaKodesh was surprisingly harsh to me, and I think it's going to be surprisingly harsh to you. He says, what people bringing Mesim from Chutz La'aretz to Eretz Yisroel to be buried, they're being mitar the tamei and being mitama the tar. They're trying to be mitar the tamei of Chutz La'aretz, and they are mitami the tar land of Eretz Yisroel with their dead bodies. Eretz Yisroel is good enough. Eretz Yisroel isn't good enough for them in their lifetime, but now that they die, now they want Eretz Yisroel? It's a tayeva. It's disgusting. These people coming to be buried in Eretz Yisroel. It's horrible. It's a chil Hashem. These people being buried in Eretz Yisroel. Very strong lishonis from the Zohar. Very surprising. Not the way that we would normally look at it. So that's definitely awakening. Let's see. How do we go? So let's also point out there's a Gemara in Moed Katan, and the Gemara in Moed Katan speaks about Aranis coming from Chutz La'aretz to Eretz Yisrael, and it's kinir. It seems to be a shvach in that Gemara. It seems to be a positive, the idea of dead bodies coming from Chutz La'aretz to Eretz Yisrael. So, what's the deal? Which way is it? So most Achronim want to explain that this is just the classical machlokes Bavli and Yerushalmi. And when there's a machlokes Bavli and Yerushalmi, how do we paskin? Like the Bavli. And if we paskin like the Bavli, then it's a good thing to be buried in Eretz Yisrael. So the Yerushalmi says it's bad. I don't care. And I'll say furthermore, most Rishonim we're going to go with the Bavli. There's a Zohar that says it's bad. Generally, when there's Nigla versus Nister, we paskin like the Nigla, so to speak. The Zohar isn't the most authoritative figure in Psak Halacha. However, one may argue, when it comes to the, after death, spooky type of things, Nister types of things, one might be a little bit concerned for the Zohar. Maybe. But let's see if that's what our Gedolim said. So the Shevet Levi actually has an interesting interpretation, and he says that the Bavli and Yerushalmi aren't arguing. He says that the Bavli and Yerushalmi are talking about different people. The Yerushalmi that was screaming how bad this is, and obviously the Zohar is based on the Yerushalmi, that was talking about people that were able to live in Eretz Yisrael and decided not to. Whereas the Bavli that's praising being buried in Eretz Yisrael, that's talking about people that were not able to live in Eretz Yisrael. And therefore it's not a stira. But once again, most Achronim believe that they are arguing. The Mei Meloyes that we quoted earlier goes on to say, the Mei Meloyes in the name of the Chesed Avram says, why is it that the Bnei Eretz Yisrael get up 40 years earlier than the Bnei Chutz La'aretz? Because they were Meiser Nefesh, they sacrificed to live in Eretz Yisrael. This is not a new thing that it's easier to live in Chutz La'aretz than in Eretz Yisrael. This is an old story. In fact, it used to be much more intense, this old story. So it's easier to live in Chutz La'aretz than Eretz Yisrael. They sacrificed to live in Eretz Yisrael. That's why they're going to get up earlier. But someone who lived in Chutz La'aretz and sacrificed in Chutz La'aretz so that others could live in Eretz Yisrael, then they are going to get up earlier, and it also said the Zohar wouldn't apply. The Zohar wouldn't apply. Actually, it's my own little addition. He didn't say explicitly the Zohar wouldn't apply, but an argument could be made that the Zohar wouldn't apply because this person sacrificed for those to live in Eretz Yisrael. Now, what does it mean to sacrifice for those to live in Eretz Yisrael? L'chayra, because once a year you went on a Sunday morning to Israel Day Parade, l'chayra doesn't count. L'chayra, we're talking about something that hurt the wallet. L'chayra, if somebody went and gave real money to support people living in Eretz Yisrael, then he sacrificed for Eretz Yisrael. That counts. How much money? I would say the amount that hurt. The amount that hurt, that was a sacrifice you give. If you're making $10 million a year and you're giving $20,000 a year, I don't know if that counts. I don't know if that hurt. A lot of people are able to take care of this with their children. If you have children that are living in Eretz Yisrael that you're supporting and learning or whatever, some people are helping out with that when amount of money that hurts. A guy is not a super wealthy guy and is giving $1,000, $2,000, $3,000 a month, whatever it may be. That could hurt. Then we might be able to suggest that the Zayir doesn't apply to that scenario. The Gesher Chaim says that the Zayir doesn't apply to those who weren't able to live in Eretz Yisrael. But, who is that? So that's a very debatable standpoint. Who isn't? A lot of people are going to tell you they can't live in Eretz Yisrael. I'm not here giving a schmooze about everybody has to move to Eretz Yisrael. And sometimes people have good reason to stay in Chutz La'aretz. But just because you have good reason to stay in Chutz La'aretz doesn't necessarily mean that you weren't somebody that could live in Eretz Yisrael. It's not a stira. Meaning there could be somebody, for whatever reason they feel that it's better for the chinuch of their children, tzarchin, but let's say they feel that that's the case, and they stay in Chutz La'aretz, somebody that could have lived in Eretz Yisrael. I don't know. There's something that for most of history, this is very, very, very applicable for the high majority of people. It used to be 100 years ago, you want to go to Eretz Yisrael, it meant saying goodbye to everybody you know, and I will never see you again, to everybody I know. And your family that you're leaving behind, you will probably never see again. And then, when you go there, you will be at risk for starvation. Okay, over there I could hear, I can't go. But I can't go to Eretz Yisrael. Not every kiddush has sushi. They don't have those, what are those, meat boards? The meat boards. And, and listen, you have to live in an apartment unless you're super rich. Don't get me wrong, I'm not downplaying the challenge. It's a challenge. It's a challenge. I'm not saying it's easy. It's very hard for somebody that's used to a standard to step down that standard. But to say that the Zayir doesn't apply because I can't do it, that's a little bit difficult, because that's exactly what the Zayir L'chayr was saying. The Zayir was saying, those people that Eretz Yisrael isn't good enough for them in their life, and it's only good enough in their death. That's a problem. Now, I'm not saying we pass it like the Zayir. We could, and as you're going to see in a minute, most poskim are going to not be concerned for the Zayir. But to say that the Zayir doesn't apply because I couldn't move to Eretz Yisrael because they don't have meat boards, or as good restaurants or whatever, that's going to be pretty difficult. Okay, I hope I didn't get too mussery for this share. Okay, right there. This is a halacha share. All right, so Lamaisa, how do we paskin? So the Shulchan Aruch and Torah says paskin that somebody who dies in Chutz La'aretz could, and it's a good thing to be buried in Eretz Yisrael. And they don't have the specification, or they don't have the clause of only those that weren't able to live there during their life. So seemingly, the Torah, Shulchan Aruch, are rejecting the Zayir and following Imsak like the Bavli. And the Ramah even goes a step further to say you could exhume the body. You could dig up a body in Chutz La'aretz and bring it to Eretz Yisrael. And once again, seemingly with no clause that only somebody that was not able to live in Eretz Yisrael. So our poskim, Torah, Shulchan Aruch, Ramah, seem to all be coming forth and saying it's a positive thing. It's true there's a Zayir, but we are not taking the Zayir la'alacha. And true, there's Yerushalmi, but we're not taking this Yerushalmi to halacha, and we're saying that we could be buried in Eretz Yisroel. Not only could we be buried in Eretz Yisroel, not only is it positive to be buried in Eretz Yisroel, but it's a big kapara to be buried in Eretz Yisrael. It's a big positive to be buried in Eretz Yisrael. And we go so far to do something which we great need to go and exhume a body. And we're saying, yes, you could exhume the body and bring it to Eretz Yisrael. Rabbi Vadia speaks about it. He's very pro being buried in Eretz Yisrael. It's a tremendous thing to do. The Tzitz Eliezer speaks about how it's a tremendous thing. The Shevet HaLevi, for those that he actually made that split. But for those that fit into the people that should be buried in Eretz Yisrael, this is a tremendous thing. You get a kapara. Tchias HaMesim will be 40 years earlier, and it's a very big positive thing to do. Most poskim are very, very pro the idea of being buried in Eretz Yisrael. Rav Hankin has an interesting idea, and he was not a fan of being buried in Eretz Yisrael. Why? So he said, first of all, let's use our funds for causes that are living, rather than causes that are not living. So in terms of, we have limited funds in Klal Yisrael, let's put them to work in the positive way. Now, sometimes it's a question, should I bury somebody in Eretz Yisrael, or should I give the money to Talmidei Chacham? And for that, Rav Henkin would say, give the money to Talmidei Chacham. Sometimes it's a question, should I be buried in Eretz Yisrael, or should I go for the BMW instead of the Camry? If that's the question, then I think there's a very big mile in Eretz Yisrael over the BMW. So, Lamaisa, for those, BMW is a lot more expensive than the Camry. Okay, just making sure everybody's following. Okay, now Rav Henkin also in his issues that he brought, there's a Gemara that discusses that at a point it became the minhag to get very expensive burial shrouds, very expensive tachrichim for the mace, and it got out of hand. It got to a point. You guys ever heard of anything Gashmis getting out of hand? If you ever heard of such a thing, so it could have happened. I heard stories. So sometimes things get out of hand. So it got out of hand, and it got to the point that the poor people were just abandoning their mesim because they couldn't afford these like $100,000 tachrichim. $100,000 burial shrouds. So therefore they made it takana, and they said you have to use the very basic cheap ones. So Rav Henkin said if it becomes a thing that everybody starts burying in Eretz Yisrael, it's going to become a disaster for the poor people. Right? And we can't let it get there. What are they going to do? I don't know, maybe they're going to buy a plot on one of these like New Jersey, Long Island cemeteries and like have a kvura with nobody there because they were too scared that they didn't want anybody to see that they're burying in America and not in Eretz Yisrael. You could have things.
Nebuch?
Yeah, it would become like a Nebuch thing. To not go to Eretz Yisrael. I could see it happening. Okay, that was his concern. L'maisa, most poskim were not concerned about that. But that was Rav Henkin's concern. And I think most poskim would say we don't make up gezeras like that. Or maybe you could even see from the Gemara, they only made the gezerah after the situation got that bad. They didn't make it preemptive. Rav Henkin he wasn't really making gezerah, but he was saying that idea was causing him to have concern. Rav Moshe, so there's a little bit conflicting stories about what Rav Moshe held about being buried in Eretz Yisrael. Some said that he wasn't particularly into being buried in Eretz Yisrael. There's one tshuva that they asked Rav Moshe that this guy bought I don't remember the areas, but he bought a plot in New Jersey. His parents are buried in Long Island. And the kids are prepared to pay for him to be buried in Eretz Yisrael. What should they do with him? And he said, send him to Eretz Yisrael. So that seems to be an indication from that tshuva that he was pro Eretz Yisrael. Secondly, that they say that when a Adam Gadol, it's not listed who it was nifter and was buried in America, Rav Moshe had anguish, and he said, "What? Somebody like that? He should have been buried in Eretz Yisroel." And because Rav Moshe said that, that's why his children decided to bury him in Eretz Yisroel. He didn't leave a tzava about being buried in Eretz Yisrael, and he didn't in his lifetime buy a plot in Eretz Yisrael. But since he said that line, of course, at least this is how the story goes. Since he said that line of, that gadol should have been buried in Eretz Yisrael, his children decided to bury him in Eretz Yisrael. So there's a couple ways of being teaching up to Rav Moshe. One is he wasn't so into it, but he was a little into it, or he was into it for chashuv people to be buried in Eretz Yisrael, but not necessarily for everybody to be buried in Eretz Yisrael. There's a couple ways of teaching it up. Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky wasn't into being buried in Eretz Yisrael. Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky was buried in America. I don't know if it was Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky who this was actually talking about. Actually, I know they were both nifter in 1986. I don't actually know who was nifter first. Rav Moshe or Rav Yaakov. I think they were both nifter in 1986. So Rav Yaakov was not into being buried in Eretz. So he gave specific instructions in his lifetime not to be buried in Eretz Yisrael, but to be buried in America. He's buried in Queens, I believe, and he gave 4 reasons as to why he wants to be buried in America. Number 1 is Halanas HaMeis. Being buried in America, chit-chat. Eretz Yisrael, it's a whole process, plane rides, Number 2 is he spoke about something which doesn't seem to be the Metzias nowadays. He said there's a nivel hameis when you get buried in Eretz Yisrael, because they would drain the bodies of the blood before they flew, and that's nivel hameis. That is not the Metzias today. Was it the Metzias then? I don't know, I guess so. Number 3 is, we'll get back into this in a second. He said it shows support for Zionism to be buried in Eretz Yisrael, and he didn't want to show any support for Zionism. Reason number 4 is that there's a inyan for the children to visit and daven at their parents' kever. And if somebody goes all the way to Eretz Yisrael, it's far away, hard for children to come visit and daven. But in America, they'll be able to do it easily, and therefore he was against being buried in Eretz Yisrael. Now let's examine these 4 reasons for a second. So reason number 1, Halanas HaMeis. There definitely is the element of Halanas HaMeis. It takes longer to be buried when you're flown to Eretz Yisrael. But to my understanding, as opposed to, I don't know what year Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky said this, they said it in the 60s. There's been a lot of advancement it's a much quicker process, much more seamless process than it used to be. Because it's common practice. The airlines are all set up for it. The Chevra Kadisha is set up to pick up the body from the they do it much quicker. You're really just talking 1 extra day. Now, sometimes you have a situation where, somebody was nifter on a Tuesday evening, and Wednesday night is the start of a 2-day yontif, and they could be buried in America on Wednesday morning. But if they wait until to Eretz Yisrael, they're going to fly out Matzah Shabbos, be buried on Monday morning in Eretz Yisrael, and it's going to be either tomorrow or a week. Yeah, that's going to be a situation. But in a regular, normal, died in the middle of the week type situation, we're talking about 1 day. And we know that the minhag is, we always wait a day for Kavod HaMeis anyways. For a lot of times you wait a day for relatives to come in from out of town, which is going to be an Indian of Kavod HaMeis. So this is certainly also Kavod HaMeis if you go to Eretz Yisrael. Tzarichin, how applicable.
At the Levaya.
Huh?
I want to have the Meister at the Kfur. He has to get there in time.
Yeah. No, it's correct. I'm saying it's definitely, it's a Kal V'chomer that's Kavod HaMeis, obviously. Now, so this Halanas HaMeis doesn't seem to be such a strong reason anymore, except the scenarios when you run into multi-day Shabbos Yontif type situations. The second reason that he brought of Nivel HaMeis, draining the blood, that's just not true anymore. I guess it was true 50 years ago, 60 years ago, I don't know, but it's not true anymore. The reason number 3 is that he didn't want to show support of Zionism. So this is a halacha shir. I'm not going to get myself into too much hot water here, but one could debate whether the fight against Zionism is just as strong of a fight as it was in 1960 whatever, when it was still fresh and Yaakov Kamenetsky wrote this? Or is that fight a little bit in the rear view mirror, and even the non-Zionist camp of Rabbanim, some of them view it as nowadays, we have what we have and let's make the best of life. So what's the right approach? Not for Allah Hasher. Okay. But there's definitely different ways of viewing that issue. I would actually argue further that I don't think being buried in Eretz Yisroel nowadays shows any element of support for Zionism. When I hear that somebody's buried in Eretz Yisroel, I don't think anything about Zionism at this point. I think the Kedushas of Eretz Yisroel. I don't know the statistics. Are more people that are Zionistic buried in Eretz Yisroel than people that aren't Zionistic? Maybe. I don't have the statistics, but I find it like I don't really hear it anymore. I don't know how it was in the 1960s, And the fourth reason about being buried close to relatives, because there's an inyan for relatives to daven and visit the kever of their parents. So it depends on you got to know your kids and your grandkids. Now, for some families, it's going to be true. Some families, if you're going to be buried in Queens and your kids are in Queens and it's going to be 20 minutes away and they're going to come visit anyways, once a month or whatever, and in Eretz Yisroel they're going to come once every 3 years, then it's a good point. Sometimes, and definitely with grandchildren as opposed to children, sometimes the way that's going to work is if you're buried somewhere an hour and a half deep into Long Island, right? And the kids are already moving to Lakewood, right? And you're buried an hour and a half to Long Island, and it's going to be 2.5 hour drive to go visit the caver. They're not going to do it. The grandkids are never going to come. When they come to Eretz Yisroel, if you're buried in Har Menuchos, that's part of the routine. When you go to Eretz Yisroel every year for the Yarchei Kala, when the grandchild comes every year to Eretz Yisroel for the Yarchei Kala, they're going to come to visit the cave of their grandfather in Har Menuchos. It's a 10-minute cab right away. So sometimes this is obviously very individual, family dependent. But sometimes the caver in Har Menuchos will get more visitors than the caver somewhere an hour and a half deep into Long Island. So whether that applies very much dependent on the specific family dynamic. Okay, so another thing interesting is the Chavetz Chaim says, when he was asked about it, he said, you're better off using the money to support Talmidei Chacham. You're better off using the money to support Talmidei Chacham than being buried in Eretz Yisroel. Now, I don't have any idea in the early 1900s what it cost to bring a mace from Radin to Eretz Yisroel. And I also don't know what it cost to support a Talmid Chacham in Radin in the early 1900s. So I'd tzarichin if it's the same exact equation nowadays. I'm guessing it was a much bigger undertaking at that point to bring a mace to Eretz Yisroel as it is today. I think according to my research, I think it cost around $4,000 to bring a mace from Chutz La'aretz to Eretz Yisroel. It's not a crazy amount of money. What is a lot of money, and what is the big difference maker, is the plot. So if you're going to get a plot in Har Menuchos, that's much more money than whatever cemetery in Long Island. But once again, you can go in the Negev, and we found out last week, I saw some were listed $4,500. I don't know that pricing, I don't know if it's up to date, but there are reasonable pricing that you could get for Kfur in Eretz Yisroel, and the transportation is not. I don't know. I'm saying it's hard to say. It's hard to say whether the Chavetz Chaim applies or doesn't apply nowadays. Now, there's an interesting story about Moses Montefiore. Moses Montefiore was a tremendous Baal Tzedakah, who he built Yamin Moshe among 2-3 other neighborhoods in that whole area. There's 3-4 neighborhoods. He built all the early neighborhoods outside of the old city. It was his philanthropy. He was from London. He made a trip to to Eretz Yisroel. He was inspired, and he became from back. He went back to England, but he became from. And I don't know exactly how from, but he became from. He built the shul, and he donated tons and tons of money to the people, the old yishuv, to build it up. Now, he ended up going back. He moved to Eretz Yisroel at a point, and he went back to Eretz Yisroel. He died. He was 100 years old, which at that point was a real Richas Yamim. He died in England, and he was buried in England, right next to his shul. And and what happened is that at a later point, there was a movement. They wanted to exhume Moses Montefiore and bring him to Eretz Yisroel. So they asked Rav Moshe, are we allowed to dig up Moses Montefiore and bring him to Eretz Yisroel? And Rav Moshe said, absolutely not. It's usher. And I really shouldn't be giving any reasons, because when I give reasons, you're going to start, some wise guy is going to start saying, no, this doesn't apply here, this doesn't apply there. But I'll give you the basic reasons why I say it's asur. Number one is only the children have the right to dig up bodies. It's not a free-for-all. You can't just have every Joe Shmo decide, I'm digging up him, he's digging up him, he's going to dig up him. Only the children have a right to dig up. Number two is, he wanted to be buried in Chutz La'aretz. He was an old man, and he went back to London. Why did he go back to London? Because he wanted to be buried there. You can't tell me that he wanted to be buried in Eretz Yisrael. He would have stayed in Eretz Yisrael. Number three, and I think this was the main one, it's a bizayin to all the other tzaddikim. Moses Montefiore was a great man. Moses Montefiore was a great Baal Tzedakah. But you can't compare Moses Montefiore to the tremendous gedolim that are buried all over Europe. Europe is loaded with kfarim of tremendous tzaddikim, and you're dafka picking Moses Montefiore over all those gedolim buried in Europe. You can't do that, and therefore he was very against it. They asked Rav Avadia. And if you understand the difference in Psak, the way that Rav Avadia operates, he said, sure, the Ramah, there's a Torah, there's a Shulchan Aruch, there's even a Ramah. You're allowed to do it. It's a great Indian to be buried in Eretz Yisrael. Go for it. And that was the Rav Avadia's Mahalach. If the Sugya comes out, it's mutter, so go for it. The Maestro didn't do it. The Sefer, so far, where we've gotten to is that there is hak, and it's not clear what, but the Maisa, at the end of the day, we see the Torah, the Shulchan Aruch, the Ramah, right over the Poskim are saying it's a very good inyan. It's a very good thing to be buried in Yisrael. You get a special kapara being buried in Eretz Yisrael, and they advise to be buried in Eretz Yisrael. And that Lamaisa is the Maskana. One other thing to keep in mind is the Sefer Chasidim does say there is hana to the Mesim when relatives will come there and daven. And once again, as I said before, it depends on the family, where they're going to come. So I would say, like I tell you, I know a story that I heard of. It's really a good friend of mine's brother that this happened to recently in the past year, and I think they made the right decision. He had already bought plots in Har Menuchos for him and his wife, and he passed away at the age of around 50 or so. Suddenly passed away, and they decided to bury him outside of Lakewood. I think there's a new Beis Kfaros outside of Lakewood, I believe, and the family lives in Lakewood, and they decided to bury him in this new Beis Kfaros outside of Lakewood. They made a cheshbon, and I guess it must have been a quick cheshbon, but I think they were right. Har Menuchos was a beautiful thing for when he died when he was going to be 90 years old and died there, and for his children to come once a year in the yurt site. It was a beautiful thing. But he has young children, and his almana might want to go there very often. For that situation, they decided to buy locally outside of Lakewood instead of Har Menuchos. I think it's a very good cheshbon. Now, Is there an Indian to be buried in Yerushalayim? So we see there's definitely an Indian to be buried in Eretz Yisroel. Is there an Indian to be buried in Yerushalayim? So the Ramban is mashma that there certainly is an Indian to be buried close to Yerushalayim. The Chassam Sofer asked an interesting question. He says, if it's true that there's an Indian to be buried close to Yerushalayim, why didn't the Avos get buried in Yerushalayim? Why did they go to Hebron? Yerushalayim. If there's Yerushalayim, why go to Hebron if there's a Yerushalayim? If the Ramban says there's an Indian to be buried close to Yerushalayim, why go to Hebron? So the Chassam Sofer says, the Chassam Sofer dik a pshat, that he says, we all know that Yerushalayim is going to expand by the time of Mashiach. And if Yerushalayim is going to expand, apparently Hebron is going to be part of Yerushalayim. And Mimela, they're going to be in Yerushalayim. So, Meridik. And therefore that would work. The Rabbah says, once again, there's a special kavod for a nifter to be buried close to Yerushalayim. There's a targum on Shir Shirim that says that Yerushalayim will give birth to her children, referring to Tchias HaMesim, that Yerushalayim will give birth to her children. There's a Messiah that Har Zaysim will split and all the dead will come out. So a lot of people connect those two. What is the giving birth to the children of the Targum on Shir Shirim? The giving birth is Har Zaysim splitting and Tchias HaMesim starting from that split. And it says, and the Messiah goes that even the tzaddikim of Chutz La'aretz are going to come out from that split in Har Zaysim. L'chayra, I assume it means the tunnels from Chutz La'aretz are going to lead to that opening. I'm not sure if that's what it means. Or maybe it's the people that are dragged along, like the Miyam Loyas, are going to come out from Har Zaysim. I was thinking myself, we all know about the turmoil that everybody discusses by the Igros Mashiach. I'm wondering if that's going to be a big earthquake. My own thought. I don't know. Maybe it's a big earthquake's going to happen right by Har Zaysim. It's going to split, and maybe that will be where the start of Tchias HaMesim may be. Now, the Shevet Levi says that we see from Masechtas Smachos, there's more kapara by being buried in Yerushalayim. But we run into a little bit of a problem because there's a Yerushalmi that brings the Tosefta that says that we don't bury in Yerushalayim. Yerushalayim has a special level of Kedusha that we don't bring Mesim into Yerushalayim. So how do we do this? We have Yerushalmi say, so you can make this into machlokes, but that's not the only way of doing it. Because you could maybe perhaps when the Yerushalmi brings the Tosefta that we're not buried in Yerushalayim because of the special level of Kedusha Yerushalayim, perhaps that's referring to the original walled city of Yerushalayim. And as you see, the cemetery was always built outside of the city. Har Zaysim was built outside the old city of Yerushalayim. Then Yerushalayim expanded. They built the Sanhedria cemetery outside of Yerushalayim. Yerushalayim expanded. They built the Har Menucha cemetery outside of Yerushalayim. And then Yerushalayim expanded again. You have whole areas, Gavat Shol, etc., way on the other side of Har Menuchas. So that's kind of how it works and kind of how it happens. But they do build outside of Yerushalayim, and then Yerushalayim seems to extend itself. So what's the whole inyan of Yerushalayim? If you're not allowed to be buried in Yerushalayim, so what's the inyan of Yerushalayim if you're not allowed to be buried in Yerushalayim? It's seemingly a catch-22. So the Shevet Levi wants to suggest that the whole Yehuda, Eretz Yisroel is split into two categories. There's Yehuda, which is the lower section, and there's Galil, which is the higher section of Eretz Yisroel. So therefore, perhaps the whole Yehuda is considered Yerushalayim, Rabasi. What's the nafkamina? Well, one nafkamina is, if you buy in Beit Shemesh, Lefi the Shevet Levi, if you buy in Beit Shemesh, you have the mile of Yerushalayim. And the Chayra, if you buy in the Upper Negev, you also have the mile of Yerushalayim. So that's, investors listen out there, because you might be able to get some cheap Yerushalayim karka. So, l'chayra, there is a advantage of being close to Har HaZeisim, because l'chayra, if that's the place where the split is going to happen, if that's the place we're going to start Tchias HaMesim, l'chayra, there is some additional advantage to Har HaZeisim. Okay, let me just sum up everything in a minute or two from what we've said, that it goes like this. We see that there's some debate whether it's a good thing or a bad thing to be buried in Eretz Yisroel. The majority of the Ma'aseh Torah, Shulchan Aruch, Ramah, majority of poskim are very pro being buried in Eretz Yisroel. Is there advantage of Yerushalayim? And certainly somebody that sacrificed for Eretz Yisroel, certainly somebody that wanted to live in Eretz Yisroel, there's an advantage for him to be buried in Eretz Yisroel. In Yerushalayim, there is the advantage of Yerushalayim above general Eretz Yisrael. However, we don't bury in Yerushalayim proper. What's included in Yerushalayim? So perhaps what we call Yerushalayim nowadays, or maybe as the Shevet Levi suggests, the entire Yehuda is considered Eretz Yisrael. All right, shkaya for listening, and have a great week.